actually have done some work on Muslim minorities in the West, in London, Paris, and Berlin, and found some very interesting and very surprising evidence to show that Muslims are no more likely than the general public in these countries to feel alienated from the nation that they have chosen to live. In fact, believe it or not, in London, Muslims are more likely than the general public to say that they identify strongly with the UK as their country. So what we found in general, a general theme, is that Muslims identify strongly with their nation, and at the same time also identify strongly with their faith. And we did not find any evidence to show that the two were trade-offs. So for example, those who identify strongly with their faith were not more likely to identify less strongly with their nation. That the two were mutually enriching, not mutually exclusive. National and religious identities, we found, were mutually enriching, not mutually exclusive. Where Muslims in these countries and the general public differed most was on issues of social morality. So what Muslims actually mirrored where we would find, where we would expect to find conservative American Christians. Were thought that things like abortion, extramarital affairs, and these types of issues were morally wrong, whereas the general European social norm was that these things, of course, were non-issues. So, whereas Muslims identified strongly with their nation, and in fact were more likely than the general population to favor mixed neighborhoods, so they weren't interested in isolating. They were different than the general population in social moral outlook. So the question really becomes, is that difference an issue? Or are diverse societies always going to have differences in social morality? And I think that Europe could really learn by looking to the United States, where there is a huge amount of diversity in our own outlook as Americans as to social issues, but that at the end of the day, we're still all American, and we don't make it some kind of a litmus test in terms of cultural conformity to measure the amount of Americanness that one holds. And that same concept, I think, needs to translate into many of these European societies so that they don't alienate their Muslim citizens. We actually asked women in these countries, do you wear hijab? And then in both cases, yes, when they said yes or no, we asked why. And what we found is that the most frequent, by far the most frequent response of why women do wear hijab was very simply that it was their religious conviction to do so. So nobody essentially said it was a statement in defiance of the culture of Europe, or it was a political statement, or it was a statement of defiance. I mean, overwhelming majority just simply said it was their religious conviction. At the same time, only about 2% said that it was something that a male relative asked them to do. So at least according to our data, this is something that people are choosing to do, and they're doing it just for the most simple reason ever, because they believe it is required by their faith. And that brings us to the second point of, what does it mean when it's banned? If people do believe in their own belief system that this is a requirement of their faith, and then the state is prohibiting them from carrying out an aspect of their faith, how can we in a liberal society really support such an act by the state to prevent the free practice of religion? Especially in a way where it's simply not affecting anyone else. It's how a woman chooses to dress. So I think what needs to be understood is really what the data clearly shows, is that hijab should not be its meaning should not be overestimated in terms of a political statement. It is simply an act of piety.